May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found pleasing in your sight, O Lord. I had a hard time digging into this gospel. I had a really hard time. I didn't understand why Jesus would even be talking about a dishonest manager and his master. A master that commends the manager for speaking for him. For stealing from him. So I went to my handy NIV study Bible and got nothing. I got nothing but instructions on how to use God's gifts on earth. Okay, but that doesn't explain why the master would commend the steward for reducing the debts he was owed. So about 46 commentaries later, that's only a slight exaggeration, I finally feel like I have a small inkling of what Jesus is talking about. That's what I like about doing sermons. It gives me a chance to learn in depth. It helps me overcome the comfort factor when I don't really understand or like the gospel. So this is the fourth in a series of parables that Jesus tells about transformation and redemption. The first is the parable of the lost sheep, where Jesus teaches that every person has value. The parable of the lost coin, where Jesus tells us every soul that is found is to be celebrated. The prodigal son, no matter how grave our transgressions, we will always find a home with God. And the dishonest manager. Even the most self-serving of motivations can eventually lead us to God. Now let's put this into some context. This manager is not managing a small holding. He is managing a very large estate for a very wealthy man. This represents the vastness of the bounty that God gives us. Now the first debtor owes about 900 gallons of olive oil. And the second owes 1,000 bushels of wheat. These are not small landowners who owe the master, and the profits just from the discount could set our manager up for many years to come. On the other hand, that would be outright theft and would bring severe repercussions, like death. So the manager gives them a 50 and 20% discount respectively, hoping to curry their favor when the axe falls. He knows his master is expecting an accounting of his stewardship, and when he is found wanting, because he will be, where will he go? He has no other talents. He has no prospects. What will he do? So, anyone in this room ever wanted to be popular? Raise your hands. Raise your hands. Come on, I know. Have you ever wanted to walk into Cheers and have everyone call your name? Norm! In grade school, I was never very popular. One time, I guess I was in about 6th or 7th grade, I started edging into the popular girls group. I would ask them questions about what they were doing, what they were reading, what their interests were. I knew I'd started to make an impact when they started saving a seat for me in class, when they invited me to have a lunch with them. Unfortunately, the effort to keep up the pretense that I was really interested came at a very high price. I was spending so much time hanging out with them that my grades went down and my parents got upset. And I decided that my grades and my parents were more important to me than a bunch of girls, so I went back to my loner ways. But I never forgot that lesson. Later on, I was once the top sales producer for a company. I lived, ate, and drank that business. And I was married to a man at the time who not only believed the same, but encouraged our total pursuit of fame and wealth. I remember sitting at the kitchen window one night watching cars go by, thinking, where are all those people going? I want to be there. I want to go there. I don't want to live this anymore. I knew there was more, and I eventually found my way out, but I never forgot that lesson. And until I dug into this gospel, I didn't know I was the manager. The manager was trying to be popular with people who could do something useful for him. He was using the debtors to secure his own future. They were the ones who could help him the most. He took steps to alter his relationships with them. His motivations are obviously self-serving and selfish. He's using his position to feather his own nest. It's hard to recognize, but his motivations are really no concern of ours. One of the important messages in this gospel is that the manager has addressed his situation by changing his behavior. He is transformed by his actions. He may not know it, but he acted on the master's words and changed his relationships. He influenced the debtors by acting in their own interests. Yes, they're his interests also, but by recognizing what is important to them and doing something about it, he is transformed. Maybe not into a kindly and godly man, but in the recognition that others have interests that are important to them. It's that recognition of others that is transformational. It doesn't matter whether he is believed or even trusted. That's not the job of the debtors, and frankly, that's not our job either. It's not for them or us to judge. What matters is that he has changed. The consequences of that change will reverberate through the rest of his life. I never forgot the lesson. And as I matured, I found that the more I learned about those around me, the more easily it became to be truly interested and care about people. I found interests and passions that took me far, far, far outside of myself. We can hope this happened to the shrewd manager, but it's not for us to judge. It's not for us to interpret what is in his heart or anyone else's heart. That's the master's job, not ours. Like the debtors, we don't know whether the discounts were sanctioned by the master. We do know that the master commended his manager for his shrewd actions. But why? If it's the master's job to investigate the heart of his manager, why on earth would he commend him for his actions? Some reasons we might consider for that. Jesus tells us that the children of the light should be knowledgeable in the ways of the world. In other words, we as Christians should be aware of the world around us and act where we see a deficit. The master commended his servant because he used his talents and gifts to secure his future. He managed his personal resources well, boding well for his use of the heavenly gifts that God will bestow on us when we reach our reward. Maybe the master and the manager knew that friendships and relationships based on reciprocity of spirit and generosity would mutually benefit both them and the others around them. And finally, the master knew the manager was in a desperate situation, faced with no job and despised by all, no talents, no prospects. What would he do? The manager acted. The manager changed. Jesus knew about hard choices. He knew that life was not always easy, that compromises needed to be made sometimes. Jesus was human, like us. He knew what it is like to be us. Through the Gospels, we can use the tools he gives us. They are the guides on how to act like Jesus in even the most trying of circumstances. They remind us that our lives here are just the beginning. The result is a life with God. Jesus knew that sometimes we are forced, either by circumstances that we've brought on ourselves or by the inadvertent actions of others, to make choices. He tells us we cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve God and wealth. But you can use your wealth to serve God. It is the pursuit of wealth for itself that will get us into trouble. We know the manager did not act with the purest of motives. But do we always? Do we sometimes split our loyalty to God with earthly things? Do we assign motives to others that are not true? We may think someone is acting in their own self-interest without knowing their whole story. We judge the motives of others based on our own experiences and knowledge. This gospel tells us that's not important. God is the only judge that matters. Our judgment of others should not stop us from acting in God's and our own interests. It does not matter what other people think. It does not matter what their motivations are. That is not for us to say. This gospel gives us a guide. The manager is us. The master is God. The master is calling us to act in the way that Jesus teaches us. He's calling on us to use our resources to help save ourselves. He will give us the tools, but we need to use them. Going to church every Sunday will not save us. It is our actions that will save us. It is what we do outside of church, how we treat individuals in our worlds. Acting as Jesus acted. Being spiritually generous and being instruments of God's will, then we will be commended by our Master. We will use his gifts wisely and prudently. We will reach our reward, but we must act as Jesus tells us. Amen.